October 2008. 38-year-old John Johnny Brian Altinger, a quality control worker at an industrial machinery manufacturing firm, was in the mood for love. Love or a one-night stand. He'd take either. Not exactly handsome, he never had much luck with the women. After trawling dating websites, he'd already met quite a few in his city of Edmonton, Canada, but rarely did it work out. Truth be told, he was a nerd. The smaller details of everyday life were important to him, so when he agreed to hook up with a woman on plentyoffish.com, he made sure to tell a friend exactly where he was going. You can never be too careful with strangers online. Johnny understood that well. But Jen was gorgeous. He couldn't resist the temptation to meet her. On October 10th, Johnny called a friend, Dale, and told him about her. She was 35, and God, was she hot. She'd sent him a message with a photo of her in a bikini. Sure, Johnny knew photos and reality aren't always the same thing, but Jen sounded cool, so he thought he'd give it a shot. But not before he copied the directions to her house and sent them to Dale. The strange thing was that she told him to meet at a garage down an alleyway. He could just lift the door, and she'd be waiting inside. It was for her own safety. I have to make sure you're not some kind of weirdo. Maybe this is paranoid on my part, but I have to look after myself. The garage was only a 10-minute drive from Johnny's bachelor pad, so why not? His hormones were now making the decisions. Jen had said that she wanted to play, and if they got along, well, maybe he could stay over. How long can I keep you for if I choose? Maybe you should pack for a few days. LOL, Jen. Dale wasn't so sure. It's a rare thing in life that an attractive woman would jump into bed with a stranger she had just met online. Dale didn't say it out loud, but Johnny wasn't exactly a prize catch. And Dale was right. Johnny messaged him a little later. He said that he'd arrived at Jen's garage to find not a bikini woman, but a young man who claimed that he was making a movie. The guy told him the movie was about a serial killer. It looked plausible. Johnny saw a fake gun and some knives. Jen had lent him the use of her garage. The guy told him Jen was stuck in heavy traffic. No problem, said Johnny, politely hiding his disappointment. He called Dale as he drove home, and they laughed about how all of his online dates seemed to end in disaster. But a few minutes later, Dale's phone buzzed with a message. She's home now. I'm heading over again. Hee hee. The sex marathon was back on. Dale couldn't wait to hear about how it went. But the days passed and Johnny didn't call. Dale sent him messages that went unanswered. Maybe the sex had been amazing, but when Johnny ignored more messages and didn't show up when he was supposed to go out on a motorbike ride with Dale, Dale became concerned. This just wasn't like Johnny at all. He was always very reliable. After Thanksgiving Sunday turned to Monday, Dale finally got an email reply. I've met an extraordinary woman named Jen who has offered to take me on a nice, long tropical vacation. We'll be staying in her winter home in Costa Rica. Phone number to follow soon. That wasn't Johnny's writing style. And why did he have to say who he'd met when they had already chatted about Jen? And Johnny wasn't a risk taker. He'd never just take off without even making a phone call. Not for a second did Dale think Johnny had written that email. He set a trap by sending another email asking how Johnny would pick up his brother from the airport if he were in Costa Rica. Johnny's brother wasn't coming to town. It was a lie just to see how the person sending the email would respond. But no one replied. Dale got in touch with all of his and Johnny's mutual friends and discovered they'd all received a similar message. Then Johnny's Facebook page was updated. John is taking off to the Caribbean for a few months. See you all when I get back. And he was now in a relationship. His boss received a personal message later that evening. Johnny was thankful for the opportunities he'd been given, but he would, quote, no longer be continuing my employment with your fine organization. His MSN Messenger status updated and was even stranger. I've got a one-way ticket to heaven and I'm never coming back. Heaven? Johnny hated hot weather. Friends kept trying to contact him, but he ignored them, except for one message from his close friend Carrie. He wrote, no need to be worried, I'm on vacation and loving it. He couldn't call because of the costs, but rest assured, he said, he was with someone wonderful. She didn't believe it and told him if he didn't call her soon, she would contact the police. But before making this a police matter, some of his friends went to his apartment. His motorcycle wasn't covered, not like him at all, and dishes in the living room hadn't even been cleared. His bed was unmade. The computer games he'd been playing were left out. It looked as if he'd just popped out for an hour, not planned to leave the country. They broke in through a window and soon discovered his laptop was missing. But if there was a reason they went straight to the police, it was because they found his passport. He wasn't in Costa Rica, that's for sure. On October 17th, Detective Bill Clark opened a missing persons file. Bill was from the homicide department. The local cops had called him in because something just didn't seem right about Johnny's disappearance. Dale showed Bill a message that Johnny had sent before he set off to meet the mysterious Jen. "If anything happens to me, you'll know where to look," because Jen had sent Johnny those directions to her garage. Not the actual address, but descriptions of the block in the alleyway. Detectives got there about midnight. The garage was locked and the windows were all covered, but a light was on. Either they could come back in the morning or get a search warrant. They chose the latter. John Altinger was in trouble. They were sure of it. It wasn't just his passport. His red Mazda was missing too. An agent from the company that rented out the garage told the police that a filmmaker was renting it. His name was Mark Twitchell. But the search warrant was denied, so they tried to find Mark, tracking him down to a residential property in St. Albert, about a 30-minute drive from downtown Edmonton. It was now getting very late, but a constable called Mark. He agreed to allow the cop to perform a preliminary walkthrough of the garage. Soon, a maroon-colored Pontiac Grand Am sedan with the license plate DRK Jedi pulled into the alley. Out walked Mark, young, decent-looking, with short, dark hair. "Strange," said Mark. "The padlock had been changed." The cops easily pried it off. The first thing that greeted them was a smell like something had recently been burned. There was an oil drum with black marks around the interior and some charred remains at the bottom. It was hard to tell what they were. Mark said he'd bought the drum to use as a trash can. He'd never burned anything in it. One of the officers then pointed to what looked like blood spatters around the wall and the floor. "It's nothing," said Mark, "just fake blood that he'd used when he was shooting his horror thriller House of Cards, a story about a serial killer filmmaker." Someone had been in the garage, he said. His things had been moved around. Maybe it was kids. They'd seemingly used up most of his duct tape and garbage bags, props for his movie. "Why are all the windows blacked out?" asked one of the officers. Mark said, "To film night scenes." He came across as a genuinely pleasant man. He was obviously involved in the creative arts, but something didn't feel quite right about him. For one thing, he wouldn't stop talking. He told the officers about the Star Wars fan film he was trying to finish with his Express Entertainment company. It was called Star Wars: Secrets of the Rebellion. Jeremy Bulloch, the British actor who'd played the bounty hunter Boba Fett, was going to be in it. It was like he was trying to impress them, telling him word has gotten around that he was making a $100 million movie for 60 grand. He made it sound like he was destined for Hollywood fame, trying to make it so he could take care of his wife and their 8-month-old baby. Some of his story checked out. Well, he was a legitimate filmmaker, and he did have a wife and child at home. But why would Johnny have been given directions to his garage, and who was Jen? The officers invited Mark to the station to answer a few questions. Nothing serious. By the time Detective Mike Tabler spoke to Mark, it was already 3:30 a.m. Mark was tired, but he sure could talk. He rambled on about his new horror thriller House of Cards. Just a 10-minute short, but he was hoping it would pick up some awards on the film festival circuit. He wanted to make a TV series out of it. He was already working on a feature film with the guy who'd co-produced Ocean's 11. Of course, he dropped a few names of A-list actors into the mix. But Detective Tabler wasn't interested in Hollywood stars. When was the last time Mark had been in the garage, and who else had access to it? October 10th, said Mark, and no one but him. October 10th. That was the last day Johnny had spoken to his friends on the phone. And the blood spatters? Mark explained it was from a scene with a guy duct taped to a chair. Torture, so loads of blood, fake stuff he'd made with corn syrup and food dye. Very realistic looking. "It's kind of weird," said the detective, "that we're looking for a missing person, and you're making a film about a guy who's been abducted and tortured by a serial killer filmmaker." Mark laughed. Yeah, what a strange coincidence. He hoped the fellow was okay, but Mark was worried about someone possibly being in his garage. "I got this weird chill, because it just doesn't sit right." He gave the detective a list of people who'd worked on his film. The detective hadn't yet named the missing person. How would Mark react when he did? "John Altinger. Do you know that name?" "No," Mark said, looking completely at ease. The detective explained. "So, this John Altinger went to your garage, but he was careful. He told a good friend he was going there. And now this friend claims John had told him he'd met a guy at the garage, making a movie. After that, he vanished, and it seems that someone might have been sending emails in his name. It all looks kinda suspicious." Mark remained calm. Maybe it was someone else. And no, he didn't know anyone named Jen. A background check revealed Mark didn't have a criminal record. He'd grown up in what appeared to be a regular, middle-class family, and in 2000 he had graduated from the Radio and Television Arts program at the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology. His filmmaking claims were real. He just didn't seem like a criminal. They sent him home. When Detective Tabler arrived at the office the next day, his inbox had a message from Mark. Apparently, Mark's wife, Jess, had reminded him about something. It was 3 a.m. last night. He'd forgotten to mention it. A few days earlier, he had just bought some gasoline when a tall fella with black hair knocked on his car window. Mark thought that he might be a beggar, but the guy told him he had a car for sale, a red Mazda 3. Mark joked that he only had $40 in his wallet, but the guy said, "Fine, I'll take the 40. He told Mark he'd soon be driving a BMW, so he didn't need his Mazda. The guy was chatty, explaining how he was about to head off on an all-expenses-paid vacation to the Caribbean with a woman of significant means. "Okay," Mark said, "deal, $40. The man gave Mark the insurance and registration documents, and that was it. Mark couldn't believe his luck, but he couldn't drive a manual, so he got his friend to pick up the car, and that's where it was now, his friend's garage. A red Mazda. That's what Johnny drove. If you'd have asked the detective last night if Mark had done anything illegal, he'd have said no. But now, $40 for a car? No way. And there was another thing Mark's wife had reminded him of. Last week, someone had broken into their car and stolen a bunch of things: sunglasses, loose change, and for some reason, receipts. One from the Western Union, another for the rent he was paying at the garage. He didn't think much about it until Thanksgiving Sunday, when after having dinner at his in-laws' place, he and Jess got home to find their house door unlocked. Nothing had been stolen, but it had freaked them out, especially with them having such a young daughter, Chloe. At the end of the email, Mark said he'd been stressed by it all. It felt like someone might have been trying to steal his identity, but he couldn't quite figure out what the break-ins and the $40 car had in common. He wrote, "Someone's obviously been tampering with my crap, using it without my awareness, and it's both infuriating and frustrating. My wife can't sleep or eat from worrying about it." Detective Tabler wasn't buying it. His suspicions were confirmed a few hours later. Forensic officers had gone around to Mark's garage with Luminol, the chemical substance that can reveal traces of blood invisible to the naked eye. When they sprayed the floor and the walls, a workbench, and tools, they switched on the alternate light source, and the room lit up with faint blue luminescent glows. There were blood stains all over the place, especially on the floor. The speckles everywhere else looked like a constellation of stars in a child's bedroom. This wasn't a movie scene. It looked like a slaughterhouse. What had Mark been doing in there? Detectives had to tread carefully. They didn't have a body, and they didn't have witnesses. So first things first, who was Mark Tetreault? He and Jess hadn't been living in Edmonton for long. The move had been a sore point. Jess hated their last place, so she gave Mark an ultimatum. Either they move or she'll take Chloe and leave. Mark was 29, and this was his second marriage, but he was still very immature. With Jess, there were problems almost right from the start. She dreamed of suburbia and white picket fences, but as a father, Mark barely ever brought home enough money to pay the bills. Mark and Jess had only been together since 2006, but they already slept in separate rooms. Yet, when Mark had spoken to the detectives, he made out his family life was perfect. It obviously wasn't. So what was he hiding? Maybe it was stress from work. Detectives learned that Mark was completely obsessed with movies. That's all he seemed to care about. A bona fide movie nerd, he went to all the conventions, usually dressing up in costumes. Wolverine, Predator, once winning $3,000 in a competition for his Bumblebee Transformer outfit. Well, he either won money or a vacation. The information is disputed. Was his fanboy cosplayer life somehow connected to the missing man? Maybe the missing guy was also a movie nerd, and they had a nerd fallout. Obsessives sometimes do strange things, and detectives learned that Mark had been attending weekly meetings with a psychiatrist. It was supposed to be a kind of marriage counseling, but Mark was evidently the one with the problem. Jess had made him go. It was that or she would leave. Suddenly, Mark, the great filmmaker with the perfect family, was looking like a fantasy. Back at the Edmonton Police HQ, Detective Bill Clark took over questioning. 30 years he'd been interrogating people. He was old school, but his style was effective. Columbo style. Don't push too hard at first, and then go in for the kill when you see a weakness. Limber them up and then break them down. Mark didn't look at all worried. No, he said, he didn't need a lawyer. Right now, said Bill, I don't know if I'm investigating a crime or I'm just investigating a missing person. He looked for changes in Mark's facial expression. Nothing, complete calm. Bill went through all the information again. Mark could leave anytime he wanted. This time, Mark offered something new. The guy that he'd bought the car off for $40. He now remembered seeing a large Celtic tattoo on his neck. Surely such a man wouldn't be so hard to find. Bill could have no idea right then just how crazy it was that Mark had made that statement. He was in for a shock. Bill went up a gear. What do you think happened to John Altinger? And what if he's been murdered? What then? Mark just shrugged and said that, well, if that's the case, the killer should spend the rest of his life in prison. Questions about murder didn't seem to faze him, so Bill went up another gear. Mark, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that you're involved in the disappearance of John. No, Mark said. He still didn't need a lawyer. And now Bill lost it. It was an act, a bad cop that he'd perfected over the years. You're lying. Why had someone seen him at the garage changing the lock? You've changed your whole story, all kinds of different lies. Bill switched back to nice cop. He told Mark he knew he was a good man who just made a mistake. Not much money, baby daughter, career not working out as he hoped. Bill's voice softened. Maybe you were just trying to make a better movie, I don't know. But something went wrong and you're involved. Even softer. And this is not gonna go away, Mark. This is gonna keep on eating at you. No response. Bill went through some more of the evidence. $40 for a car, that was obviously a lie. A barrel with burn marks in it, that's what homicide investigators call a burn barrel. And what about going out to buy gasoline? Mark had earlier said it was for his lawnmower, but he didn't even own a lawnmower. Mark still looked unfazed. He just said, "Can I go now?" As he walked out, Bill, now obviously frustrated, not acting, told Mark he would get search warrants and upturn every single inch of his life. Mark just shrugged. He almost smiled when Bill told him for the last time that this would eat away at him. As he was about to walk out the door, he turned around to face Bill and said, "You'd be surprised what I can live with." The detectives secured search warrants for the garage, Mark's Pontiac Grand Am, and his house in St. Albert. They also got a warrant to monitor his phone calls and track his movements via cell towers. It didn't take long for investigators to find something in the Grand Am. There were blood stains in the trunk. The laptop in the car, covered in superhero stickers, also bore faint marks of blood. And in the back seat, something else. Not hard evidence, but a clue. A novel, Dexter, the story of an American forensic analyst / serial killer that was a hit TV show. And a hunting knife that was found beside some scribbles on paper that sounded like cryptic instructions. Ship phone while it's on. Return Addy of Vic. Destroy wallet contents. And kill room clean sweep. The only one that wasn't clear was Return Addy of Vic. Was that referring to the victim's address? There was also a hand-drawn map of what looked like directions to Johnny's apartment. But without a body, this circumstantial evidence would never stand up in court. They needed something solid. Johnny's DNA. They took swabs from his razor and his cutlery, old drinking straws and nail clippers, hoping that they'd find a match somewhere on Mark's properties or cars. And then something happened that changed everything. The detectives discovered that a week or so before Johnny had gone missing, a couple had reported seeing a man in distress not far from Mark's garage. They'd been walking their dog when this guy ran up to them, his face petrified with fear, marks around his cheeks and eyes, begging them to help him. As he flailed in front of them, another man appeared. He was wearing a hockey mask with gold lightning strikes painted on the face. Their presence seemed to put him off whatever it was he was about to do. Everyone quickly dispersed. They reported it as maybe an attempted mugging. Police briefly looked for the two men, but they put it down to weirdos possibly playing a prank. It was forgotten about until detectives started working on Johnny's case. But this is where things didn't add up. The incident in the street happened a week before Johnny went missing. Were there more victims? Was all that blood on the garage floor from multiple people? Detectives went in search of all of Mark's colleagues, past and present. But Mark had gotten to them first. In an email, he warned them that the cops were trying to connect him to the case of a missing guy he'd never even met. Don't trust them, he said. Sometimes what we see on TV is in fact a true representation of how they work. Sometimes they do lie. This is no prank. Every inch of the garage was tested for DNA traces. Forensics found plenty of blood. There was a pipe covered in cloth that appeared to have blood on the end. There were also knives, and more disturbing, they found the kind of tool pathologists or surgeons use to spread human ribs to gain access to internal organs. Mark could quite easily say all these instruments were for his horror movie. In a court of law, he was a simple filmmaker without a criminal record. He didn't know the victim. He had a wife and a child. It wasn't a strong case. Not yet. But when a forensics team got inside his laptop, there was a major break: deleted files. One in particular, a file named SK Confessions. SK? Serial killer? It was 40 pages. It started, "This story is based on true events. The names and events were altered slightly to protect the guilty." The opening paragraph, "This is the story of my progression into becoming a serial killer. Like anyone just starting out in a new skill, I had a bit of trial and error in the beginning of my misadventures. Of course, it was possibly just fiction, but it sounded so real." The killer said he was psychopathic. Even as a child, he'd realized something was different about him. He didn't feel empathy. He had to pretend to be sad or feel guilty. And he had a lot to feel guilty about. He said that he'd had fantasies all his life about wanting to hurt people. But he waited. Age 30 was the cutoff mark for his first murder victim. Mark was 29, and the killer intended to get away with it. He'd spent his early manhood studying forensics. His choice of victim, single males, 30s or thereabouts. He explained, "I would use online dating to rope in my victims." For the investigators, this was already compelling evidence, but what the killer had written next almost mirrored exactly what might have happened to Johnny, except the victim in the story was named Jim. He described the location of Jim's murder: a double-detached garage in the south of the city, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood on a lot with a house occupied by tenants who couldn't even read English, much less speak it. In real life, that was true. Immigrants lived in the house above the garage. The detectives might not have had a body, but staring at them was a step-by-step explanation of what Mark might have done next. The detectives had found a hunter's game processing kit in the garage, the kinds of tools needed to strip down a hunted animal. SK Confessions mentioned one too. In his, quote, little workshop of horrors, he could use that kit to dismember corpses. That was the easy part. The hard part was not leaving a digital trail. The killer in the story said he used a VPN when contacting men online. He then created a variety of email addresses under fake names. He said he'd find photos of sexy women to ensnare virile men. Just regular guys, preferably desperate. And if they lived alone, they'd be easy to steal from once he got their keys. To cover his tracks at home, he'd kill only on Fridays. That was when his wife believed he had meetings with a psychiatrist. In the story, the wife was Tess and the daughter was Zoe. Tess, Jess, Zoe, Chloe. And since he'd be free on the weekends, it'd give him time to clean up the crime scene. With so many lonely men out there, he figured he could start claiming a victim every week. But when he'd first tried to murder Jim, things hadn't gone to plan. Jim had turned up too early. The killer was still preparing his tools. He sent Jim away, telling him the woman he was supposed to be meeting got sidetracked. She was the person who had lent him the use of her garage so he could make a movie. This was exactly what happened to Johnny. The killer obviously hadn't expected Jim or Johnny to tell this to his friend. "She's home now. I'm headed over again. Hee hee." In the confessions, the killer said Jim must have been really desperate because he kept trying to come back. On the third attempt, the killer struck. Everything in Mark's garage, all the tools, the layout was exactly how it was described in the story. The confessions said Jim had walked into the garage and the killer had struck him with a pipe and proceeded to stab him with a hunting knife. The story then described how the killer had dismembered Jim's body and burned the parts in an oil drum with recently purchased gasoline. In the story, Tess, or Jess, had called him right when he had his hands full with organs and limbs. Here, the story became dialogue. "Hey baby, what's up?" "Not much. Where are you?" "I'm just leaving the gym, hun." "The gym closes at 9. The killer wrote. I checked my watch hurriedly. It showed 9:57 p.m. My mind raced. I couldn't get caught in a lie. Not again. "New gym, later closing time," he said. She believed him. In the story, the killer went to Jim's apartment and stole his laptop and printer. The apartment he described was a perfect match for Johnny's place. To the killer's great surprise, Jim, or Johnny, hadn't even logged out of his laptop. The killer now had free reign of his emails and socials. He wrote, "I couldn't have had an easier time." The killer set Jim's email to an auto-reply, a message about going away with a rich woman to the Caribbean. Exactly what had happened to Johnny. Detectives had never seen anything like this. A possible murderer writing about his crime in what appeared to be fiction. Every single detail matched what they knew about Johnny, but they still couldn't be sure Mark had actually killed him. If he had killed Johnny, were there other victims? Hockey mask guy, was that Mark? And if so, where was the running man now? By this time, detectives had already searched Mark's house. As Jess had sat nervously on the sofa, a team swept every room. This is what they took: swords. Several of them. No hunting knives, but a recent receipt for a butcher's knife. A receipt for recently purchased handcuffs. A BB gun and some pellets. Shockingly, what looked like a hand-drawn design for a metal operating table. And yes, a hockey mask. Black with gold lightning strikes painted down the face. They found it in the basement with some computers they seized, as well as a sweatshirt that looked as though it had been stained with blood. It was in the basement where they found something else: DVDs. Dexter, the full second season. Jess was upset. She'd already told detectives that Mark had been sleeping in the basement for a few weeks. They hadn't been getting along. She was sure that he'd been cheating on her with more than one woman. Every time she confronted him, he gaslit her and called her paranoid and over-emotional. She tried in vain to patch things up. She thought Mark was at least trying because he'd agree to see a psychiatrist every Friday evening. In SK Confessions, the killer had written, "So every Friday, I would leave the house and prep for a kill while my wife was convinced my shrink was working his magic. I even added the special performance of seeming lighter and more relaxed when I walked back into the house. The truth was," he wrote, "the murders did make him feel better, so Jess, wasn't imagining things." For detectives, what mattered most was that the killer had written, "every Friday." How many people had he murdered? Detectives asked Jess some more questions. The Friday Johnny went missing, Mark had come home late. He said that he'd been at the gym. Check. Mark had been acting strange for months. Jess told the detectives not long ago that he'd confessed to her. He'd admitted he had no feelings. He felt zero empathy toward anyone or anything. Check. That was one of the reasons she'd persuaded him to get psychiatric help. Check. She couldn't live with a man and bring up a child with him if he had no capacity to feel. Was Mark a true psychopath, or was this all part of a fantasy? Detectives tracked down his first wife, Megan Castorella, an American he'd been with from 2001 to 2004. The divorce papers noted her husband's extreme and repeated mental cruelty. Another check. He'd moved on, but evidence on his laptop showed he'd investigated whether he was a psychopath. He filled out evaluations and written detailed explanations of how he'd lied his entire life. How he'd deceived people to get funds for his movies, how he'd pretended to be someone he wasn't with all the women he dated. He had written, "Like many psychopaths, I have trouble holding down a job because I get bored very easily." He lied to Jess about everything, telling her he was out meeting with investors when instead he'd put on a shirt and tie and just go to a coffee shop. And Jess was right. He was cheating on her. In his profile of a psychopath, he admitted to psychological torture, making his wives think they'd gone mad, that they were paranoid and jealous. He said when Jess had discovered his Ashley Madison profile, he convinced her that he was making a documentary about infidelity. He'd even written fake emails from the crew and hired an actor to pretend to be the editor. Detectives were stunned. This case was straight out of Hollywood. Literally. Mark had pulled a Kaiser Soze from The Usual Suspects on him. In his confession, he talked about meeting an ex he'd had sex with while he was married to Jess. Her name was Tracy. She was real. He dated her in university and cheated on her repeatedly. And she had a tattoo, a Celtic cross. Mark was incorporating real-life stories into the stories he told the detectives. The Celtic cross tattoo, he said, belonged to the guy who sold him the car. One thing was clear. Mark thought he was a genius. Everyone around him was a mere prop in the epic story of his life. As for his movie, House of Cards, his files revealed that he'd been inspired by Dexter. His film was about a serial killer who lures a man to his death by pretending to be a woman on a dating website. The killer tortured and murdered him, decapitating him and dismembering the body. But there was a twist. The next shot was the same man at his family home. He'd just finished writing a story about a serial killer, and then he closed the laptop and slipped it into a bag, where the camera zoomed in on a stun gun, some gloves, and a hockey mask. So, the writer in House of Cards was the killer in his own story. This possibly made Mark a killer writing about another writer who was a killer writing about a killer. A story within a story within a story. Art imitating life. But the detectives still didn't have a body. They found the actors for House of Cards. The guy who had played the victim told them that he wasn't impressed with Mark using real weapons. All he'd been told was that it was a film about a writer who was actually the killer he was writing about. The strange thing was, after the torture scene, the actor noticed Mark hadn't used much fake blood. He certainly hadn't thrown any of the blood that was on the walls or the floor. Police then called in the dog walkers to the station for an interview. It was October 3rd when the woman, Marissa Gurney, and her boyfriend, Trevor Hossinger, saw the guy staggering toward them. He almost collapsed at their feet after running out of an alleyway. His shirt was torn, and he had bruising on his face. He was unsteady on his feet like he had taken drugs. As he started screaming about being robbed, the guy in the hockey mask approached, a mask matching the one found in Mark's basement. In a friendly, jocular voice, the masked guy told the other guy, "Come on, Frank, come back." He was obviously trying to make out that this was all some kind of game between friends. But what had happened to Frank? On October 31st, police arrested Mark. The lab tests were all in. They showed that the pipe in the garage was covered in microscopic bone fragments, muscle, and skin, and a tiny speck of a human tooth was found on the floor. As for Johnny's DNA, it matched some of the blood found in the garage, in Mark's Pontiac, and on items found at his house. Now they knew for sure Johnny had at the very least been seriously injured, but based on everything else, he'd almost certainly been murdered. Mark was charged with first-degree murder, but without a body, a good lawyer could no doubt get Mark off. His lawyers were already claiming Mark was merely a filmmaker caught up in something he'd had no part in. Without Frank, the detectives knew their case just wasn't strong enough. Frank was mentioned in the SK confession story. He'd been lured into the garage. I roped him in with a profile I was quite proud of, featuring photos of a blonde I would like to bang myself. Everything was set up. The killer added, "My kill room was perfectly prepped, plastic sheeting taped together and around my table." But when Frank had walked into the garage, the killer said he'd fought back. The stun gun barely seemed to affect him. Frank ran. The killer followed him, but a couple was walking down the street with a dog. And again, the story perfectly matched real life. But if Frank had escaped, then why had no one come forward? He had to be out there. Police told the story to the newspapers and appealed for the victim to speak to them. This is what had actually happened to Frank. Gilles Tetreault had recently been dumped by his girlfriend when he'd received a message from a very attractive blonde woman on the dating site Plenty of Fish. Sheena was her name, and she was just looking for a bit of fun. In terms of hotness, she was levels above Gilles, so when she asked him to come over to visit, he was almost out of the house before he finished reading the sentence. But Sheena said he could only come on one condition. She was just being careful. He'd have to first go into her garage. "No problem," Gilles said. Without telling anyone about his hot date, he turned up 15 minutes late and rushed into the garage, and before he could think, he'd been hit on the head. He turned around in shock, and his eyes met a face hidden by a hockey mask. Looking down, he heard the sizzle of a stun gun and saw the blue light as he was zapped. His immediate response was surprise. He'd always thought that being buzzed with a stun gun would be more painful. The masked man then pulled out a gun. "Kneel," he shouted. Gilles did as he was told as the man wrapped duct tape around Gilles' eyes. If the guy wanted money or his car, fine, he could have them. But then he thought, what if this was more than a robbery? Some kind of deviant sex thing. He stood up, ripped the tape from his eyes, and fought for his life. The masked guy pulled out the gun again, but when Gilles grabbed it, he realized it was plastic, a fake. The guy punched him in the face, but with all the adrenaline, Gilles again barely felt it. It was at this point he realized the power of a stun gun. The muscles in his legs gave way as he tried to crawl under the garage door to safety. As his fingernails tried to grip the concrete, the guy started pulling him back inside. Gilles kicked out and managed to get to his feet, running out of the alley and straight into a couple walking a dog. The attacker followed him and then, for some reason, called him Frank. Gilles just ignored him and walked to his car. A mile or so down the road, he pulled over and vomited. What in God's name had just happened? After lying down at home and waiting for the shaking to stop, he went to his Plenty of Fish messages. The guy or girl was gone. Her spider web's profile no longer existed. Gilles' ex and his friends told him that he had to go to the cops, but the next morning he was feeling better, and to be honest, he felt humiliated. What an idiot he'd been to believe that he was going to have great sex with a total stranger who looked like a bikini model. After a few more days, he convinced himself that it hadn't been a big deal, probably just some kids trying to get cash for drugs. So he chose to leave it alone and count it as a life lesson. On November 2nd, his phone started ringing in the morning. It was his friend Andrew telling him to look online at the Edmonton Journal. Police wanted to speak to a guy who had recently been attacked by someone in a hockey mask. It It was a missing persons case, a very serious matter. "Yes, that's me," Gilles told the detectives after sitting down with them at the gas station. "I guess I'm Frank." The evidence was now stacking up against Mark. Detectives also heard from a woman in the U.S. Her name was Renee Waring. She'd friended a guy on Facebook who had Dexter as his profile image. She was obsessed with the show, so she thought, why not? Maybe it's even the real Dexter. It wasn't, it was Mark. He talked to many women online with his Dexter profile. After days of chatting, Renee joked with him about killing her husband and cutting up his body. Mark replied with an earnest, step-by-step guide to killing someone in what he called a kill room. He gave her more information on how to dismember bodies and clean everything down. A hunter's game processing kit comes with everything you need to cut the body into manageable pieces. He then went quiet for a few days, around the time Johnny went missing. When he chatted with Renee again, he told her that something important had kept him busy. "I'm really hesitant about telling anyone because of the implications. Suffice it to say, I crossed the line on Friday, and I liked it." Mark was a killer, no doubt, but where was Johnny? In SK Confessions, the killer had talked about the murder and disposal. Jim, Johnny, had walked through the garage door and to his disappointment found a man, not a woman. He laughed and said, "I guess I'm just a glutton for punishment." The response was, "You have no idea." As the killer hit him with a pipe and knocked him half unconscious, Jim screamed for the police. He offered money, anything, just let him live. As he lay on the ground groaning, the killer produced a large hunting knife. In his confession, the killer wrote, "His reaction was pure Hollywood. The lurch forward with the grunt was dead-on TV movie of the week." The killer stuck the knife in Jim's neck, enjoying it so much he forgot he was supposed to torture him and get his ATM pin. He dragged Jim onto his homemade metal surgical bench, writing that next time he'd try to pick someone who wasn't so heavy. Then he used his tools to cut through Jim's flesh, muscles, ligaments, and bones. The first leg came off easily. He cut off each limb and then the head, leaving only the torso on the bench. He wrote, "It wasn't nearly as horrendous as the media made it look on TV or in the movies. Dismembering a human body was a relatively unexciting event." He drove the body parts and the oil drum to his parents' place and tried to burn everything, but when he heard a siren, he panicked, thinking it might be the fire department. He still needed to burn the torso and the head, so he took it all inside and cut everything into small morsels. The lungs, the heart, and the liver all came out. I cut those up too before trashing them. It reminded me of emptying a pumpkin for Halloween. He then dumped all the pieces in Edmonton's sewer system. But where? Mark wouldn't tell the police, and after months of searching the sewers, they still hadn't found anything. It wasn't until June 3, 2010, when Mark was still awaiting trial, that he invited detectives to his jail cell. He slid them a piece of paper with a Google map printed on it. Next to it, he'd written, "Location of John Altinger's remains." And sure enough, Johnny was there. Torso, organs, bits of teeth, all in all about half of his bones. There was so much evidence, but Mark had a trick up his sleeve. He'd soon shock the world once more. On March 16, 2011, the trial began. When it came time for him to take the stand for defense, the jury seemed impressed with his storytelling skills. He was obviously relishing in the spotlight. "It wasn't what they thought," he said. You see, for years he'd been working on what he called his project, Multi-Angle Psychosis Layering Entertainment, or MAPLE. No one had done anything like it in the history of filmmaking. It was like an interactive movie he called House of Cards, like a found footage film mixed with regular action and real documentary. In it, he'd break the fourth wall, meaning something similar to Michael Haneke's horror masterpiece Funny Games, when the killers talked to the camera. So, in Mark's film, the audience would never know if the murder and the murderer were real or if they were watching a movie. He'd then write a book about the film, SK Confessions, but the reader would still be guessing what was real. He said the idea was to send people down the rabbit hole and they'd have to interactively seek out the truth. They'd become a part of the mystery. They'd find out that the director, him, had used Dexter as a profile on social media. People he communicated with would come forward and talk about how he was obsessed with murder. As for the victims lured to his garage, well, he needed to make it look real so people would find out. Only when those guys turned up at his garage, he would let them in on it. They'd play along with it because they'd be a part of cutting-edge art. But with Gilles, Mark changed his mind at the last minute. He let Gilles think that he'd actually been attacked. Why? It would add to the realism for the people then down the rabbit hole. As for Johnny, Mark said that when he'd returned for the third time, he had told him all about Project Maple. But Johnny was irate at being lied to. They got into a fight. Johnny hit Mark with a pipe. He managed to grab it and hit him back. Mark told the jury he was scared, so he picked up a knife, but Johnny had lunged at him and Mark accidentally stabbed him. He told the jury it was just the sickest feeling ever. He didn't know if to call 911. If he did, he'd look guilty. No one would believe it was an accident, all part of a groundbreaking movie experiment. He said as soon as the cops read SK confessions, they would think it was real. By trying to make the most realistic murder film in history, Mark had laid a perfect trap for himself. It was art imitating life at its most extreme, the most daring thing a filmmaker had ever done. If it had gone to plan, Johnny would still be alive. Gilles would be upset, but he'd get over it, and Jess would finally understand the sacrifices her husband had made for his art. The prosecution called him a fantasist. He was deranged, not an artist. And Johnny was a hero. Had he not taken down Jen's details, Mark would very likely have become a serial killer. On April 12, 2011, Mark was found guilty of first-degree murder, life in prison with the chance of parole in 25 years. The Globe and Mail reported that as he walked out of the court, he shouted back to everyone watching, "Bye, have fun." He's since watched every episode of Dexter and once claimed on a prison pen pal website to be looking for an intelligent, open-minded woman he wanted to share his relentless imagination with. We're not sure if he found her, but his imagination might be back on the streets if a parole board in 2035 or 2036 decides he can be released.